so I will get us started. I just want to welcome everyone this evening. I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Nikki Bonus, and I'm the CEO and the founder of Life Skills Go. I won't go on about myself. So you read my bio or find out a little bit more about me later on. Yet one of the things that I would say is I'm really excited to have Mark here this evening. Just going to do a couple of things before we get started. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and pay their connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that to all respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We're here tonight because of an event called National Check-In Week. And again, there's nothing worse than reading off a slide. But I want to personally thank you for giving your time so generously, Mark, for also being here this evening and being willing to share and impart information. National Check-In Week was a real call for voices to come to the space to begin to speak up, look at what needs to change, and a collective, how can we all work together? I am going to go over a tiny bit of housekeeping. So those of you that have just arrived, the session will be recorded, so it will be sent out to you within 24 hours. It is an interactive webinar, so please pop into the chat any questions that you have. We do have beautiful staff members that will feed them to Mark and myself. Sometimes the chat gets so busy that we don't get to everything, but we do follow through with a follow-up email tomorrow with the recording, and there'll also be some free resources, and just depending on where we sort of segue from this panel this evening. Now we're going to get to the man of the moment, and that would be you, Dr. Mark Williams. I think, again, I'm not really big on reading out bios, and, after meeting you and also sort of reading through your website and reading quite a bit about you, I suppose one of the things that I'd love to know is there is a lot of information on the internet, and I know personally your passion for education. What's something that's not there that people would find really interesting about you?
That was a
That's
loaded
cheeky,
question.
wasn't it? That was cheeky.
Very loaded question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I most people see my CV and think that I was probably one of the good kids, and that I was probably very dedicated to school from a very young age and had this passion to become a neuroscientist. But it was quite the opposite. I grew up in a small country town, and my mother had mental health issues, and there's a lot of drugs and alcohol in the town and a lot of violence. And so I was a truant from pretty much grade 5, grade 6. I started wagging school, and we'd go down to the lake and smoke pot and fish. When I was about 15, my principal told me I'd be dead or in prison by the time I was 25. So I really wasn't one of those kids that teachers would love to have in their classrooms, to say the least. And
everyone's queuing up right now to have you. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, but it was when I was 25, after doing a lot of stupid things. 2 of my friends had drug overdoses, and I decided to go back to school, and so I went to TAFE to do my HSC. I didn't really know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go, but there was a physics teacher there that changed my life, literally, like just convinced me that I should go and do science, and that he thought I had an aptitude for it. And so I did. I enrolled in Bachelor of Science and ended up doing a double major in physiology and psychology, and then doing a PhD in medicine, and then going and working at MIT over in the US. So, and that's why I like working with teachers now, because teachers can have such a huge impact on people and on their students. And I don't think they realize often the impact they have. And it is so important to acknowledge that, because it can drive you either way, right? It can drive you to be very successful, or it can drive you the opposite way. And to begin with, it drove me the wrong way. And, not just everything else that was happening, obviously, but that small amount of support and that small encouragement from one teacher really did change my life, and it's something we all need to think about.
I think I was just, listening to your story. I think you're right. That's not something that many people, reading your bio, reading your website would take away or walk away, and particularly someone who's dedicated his whole career to this area. And so that leads me into, one of the themes that we picked for this evening around connection. And when I think about that story that you were speaking about, your physics teacher, I often say to educators, you have the power every day to alter the course of this young person's life, because that relationship is so important. But I have another curveball question for you, Mark, just because, why make it easy at 7 o'clock at night? You'll never come back again. So when I think about schools, and we work with a very, very large amount of schools. When I think about schools, I think about relationships, I think about community, and I think about learning. Where would you recommend we start tonight first? Where is probably the best support for students, and why? So relationships, community, learning.
Oh, that is a curveball, isn't it? I think
I'm horrible. My staff are sitting there going, gosh, this poor man's not going to come back.
yeah, I think relationships have always got to come first. Whenever I work with schools, I always talk about the importance of the relationship, both between the teacher and the student, but also the students, each other within the classroom, because that's going to help with their learning as well. And of course, kids actually learn better from each other than they do from adults, which has a lot to do with the peer group, right? And understanding who they can trust, because we learn really, really easily. Humans are amazing learners, and we learn through two-trial learning, which is amazing compared to anything else we've got. Compared to computers take thousands and thousands of trials to do what we can do in two trials. But you only learn from people you actually trust, and so having that relationship first, so that there's trust there, is so important in the classroom. And there's beautiful data now. There's a recent study where they recorded the brains of all the students and the teacher all at the same time. And they were looking at because our brains oscillate in different frequencies depending on what state you're in, and alpha, beta, and gamma, and all those things. And alpha, of course, is when you're in a nice, calm, meditative state, and so on. Anyway, they looked at the students that were connected with the teacher. They did a whole survey beforehand to work out who was connected with the teacher. And then they looked at the brainwaves that were occurring when the teacher stood up and started teaching. And they found that the students who were connected with the teacher, their brains actually started oscillating together. So they actually they synchronized with each other. Whereas the students who weren't connected with the teacher, they never actually synced up. And then they actually looked at what the students remembered from what the teacher was teaching. And they showed that when the students' brains were synced up, when they're oscillating the same frequency, the kids remembered the information they were being taught. And when they were asynchronous, they didn't remember the information. So, you've got to actually have that connection, so that when you start teaching, your brains sync up so that you can actually transfer that information, whatever it is that you want to transfer to the students. And I don't think you probably don't need that brain science to know that, right? I think any teacher will tell you that the kids in the classroom, that they have a relationship, are the kids that actually sit and learn. And the kids that don't have a good relationship are the ones that they have issues with, and that are more of a problem. But yeah, there is some really good research now showing that it is really crucial to have that relationship first. And that takes time.
And I think that, if I sort of lean into that one, I go, okay, those foundational relationship building skills that we often, or educators are so busy in those classrooms, so much curriculum to get through. And my mind was just popping when you were talking around making time. Like, how do we truly get to know how our young people are, what's happening for them, and leading into, connection. And I'd love to understand from, from neuroscience, the power of connection, developing connection, trust, relationships, and how that creates that sense of belonging. And I'll probably leave it there. Otherwise, I will give you another curveball and you might hang up on me right now. I'm getting all a bit excited.
Yeah, it's so, we've got to remember that our brains are exactly the same as they were 10,000 years ago. They haven't changed in the last 10,000 years. And for the vast majority of that time, we haven't been living in isolated little homes. For the vast majority of that time, we were living in groups, in larger groups, and we were moving around together, and we were trusting each other, and we were communicating with each other, and we were working for about 4 hours a day, and then the rest of the time we're actually socializing with each other and grooming each other and transferring information, teaching each other what we needed to survive. The older generations would be teaching the younger generations, and the younger generations would be helping the older generations, so on. And that's where our brains, that's what our brains evolved to do, is to sit around and talk to each other and spend time with each other. And we know now from the Harvard study, which came out, which has been going for 75 years, that the number one thing that can actually increase your lifespan by 10 to 15 years, decrease the likelihood of you having neurodegenerative diseases, improve your IQ, make you smarter, decrease the likelihood of you having mental health issues, improve your cardiovascular system, and decrease your stress levels, is just to sit down with someone you trust on a regular basis and chat to them. It's like the best thing you can do for both your brain and your body. And, we're all trying to get up at 4 a.m. and, doing ice bars and rubbing avocado over ourselves and doing.
I was just thinking, I'm going to have to stop you, because if we were sponsored by Alpha Bars and saunas right now, we wouldn't get them again. So I just want to pause for a second there. When you spoke of all those benefits, the simplicity of connection and being with someone, the simplicity. And I'm sorry, I cut you off because it was it came off your tongue so simply, and yet it also made me recognize how complicated we make things at time, and how hard it is to be really present with someone. I'll jump back here. I'll let you jump back in there. I'm so sorry. I was just like, wow, that is so simple. All of those things I was going tick, 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 tick. But when do we actually stop, connect, sit, and be present with someone that we trust? Sorry, back to you.
Yeah, it is. Like, it's crazy that we're doing all these other things, and yet we're not doing that one simple thing, which is just to sit down and chat with someone. And especially younger kids and teenagers these days, they spend, there's this awful loneliness epidemic that's going on in our society. And it's the teenagers now that are the loneliest group in society. It used to be the elderly, and now it's teenagers that are the loneliest group. And it's one of the reasons is that actually sitting down and chatting with someone is a really complex thing to do, right? You've got to recognize facial expressions, you've got to recognize body language, you've got to recognize who the person is, you've got to recognize, you've got to listen to what they're actually saying, and you've got to monitor the prosody of the voice to work out whether or not they're having a go at you, or whether or not they're, nice and so on. Plus, you've got to then respond to them in kind, in the same way that they're talking to you. And so it's a really complex thing to do. And teenagers and kids today aren't doing it because it's tough, because it's complex. But you got to do it, because if you don't do it, then you're not going to become a member of this society, right? A member of who we are. But it's easier for them to, of course, sit at home on their phones or on their devices, rather than actually go out and actually spend time with each other and actually talk to each other and do these things. And we know that, things like ADHD are on the rise, and the vast majority of that is being caused by devices, right? It's been caused by screens. The earlier you're on a device, or the longer you're on a device, the more likely you are to have ADHD. Now, there's some great ways to use devices, but just sitting in your bedroom on a device and texting your friends constantly rather than going out and hanging out with them is not a good way to be using your device. So we need to have a rethink and start using the devices in a way which benefits us, and doesn't benefit which benefits us, full stop.
And I think, coming back to that connection and that role of connection, and I suppose we get asked a lot, how do I increase the sense of belonging in my school? It's a very big metric, and it's a very large subject. And with the simplicity of the statement that you made, to sit down and connect with someone you trust, and then with all of those skills that are required. I suppose another question I probably have for you is, where can we start? Because we have the data on the disconnection. We know that young people are online We also know that they arrive at school in states that are not optimal for learning, and schools are busy places. So kind of painting the picture of this incredible place. It's about relationships and connections and learning.
Mhm.
But it's, the roles of a teacher and educator, they're complex. Where do we start? Where can we start with these young people to really build connection?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. I think there's, as you said, there's multiple aspects to it. I think one of the simplest ways, which takes very little time, is actually just to touch your students and touch them in an appropriate and way, of course. But as humans, we've evolved C fibers in our skin, and the only reason we have C fibers, and they only activate to touch, to human touch, and when they activate, they release oxytocin in our brain, which makes us more willing to connect with the person who just touched us, and actually makes us more open to have a relationship with that person. And that's why in all societies we've got some way of touching each other when we actually greet. So in Stoic societies, we shake hands. In Europe, they'll kiss each other on the cheek. Even the Inuits, who are fully covered, they'll rub each other's noses because it's the only skin that's actually showing, so they can get that oxytocin. And so, simply shaking hands with the students as they enter the room, and I'm looking them in the eyes, is a great way to release oxytocin in their brain and in your brain, and to make yourselves more connected with each other. And it has a really profound effect on the classroom, because all of a sudden they feel as though they're much more connected to the teacher, and the whole system works better because they've got that oxytocin flowing in their brains, and they're actually feeling connected to that classroom. And it's a really easy thing to do, and it takes a couple of seconds. I know teachers are extremely busy and all the rest of it, and we lost that. We were already losing it before COVID, but then when COVID happened, of course, nobody wants to touch anyone anymore because we're all scared of germs. But you can get hand sanitizer, and you can put as much on as you need to make you feel safe. But it is so important for us to get back to actually touching each other, which is why if you see a child crying, you want to put your arms around them. When someone's really upset, they'll actually grab themselves because they need that touch, right? It's such a fundamental part of us as humans, and it's really sad that we've taken that away from teachers, and that's been removed from the classroom, when it is such an important part of the classroom, or such an important part of us as humans, to connect with each other.
Yeah, so I was just reading some great comments coming through. Sorry, I got slightly sidetracked.
You're right.
And I think, so I think that, you're right. I think COVID brought in some really interesting, some interesting things, but we have the opportunity to begin to sort of break them down now, and going back to, and I think Joe just, made that too, eye contact, touch, appropriate touch. I kind of want to just have a little dive into our young people, the things that we don't see. And, we often will have schools say to us, if we don't get well-being right, learning can't happen. And yet there's sort of this pause waiting for, the next statement, for someone to explain that a little bit more eloquently around what's going on in the brain. And I think if we kind of bring it back to a dysregulated young person, who's sitting in the classroom and is in a state of dysregulation, could you explain in very layman terms for people like me, what's happening for that young person, and why does please just listen or please follow this instruction not work?
So it really depends. I mean, it really depends on what state the child's in, because it's not just one. We talk about them having mental health. A child having mental health issues or whatever, but there's multiple different mental health issues they could have, or there's multiple different states they could be in. So
let me give you one. You ready?
Yeah.
So they're angry, or they're sad, or they're just experiencing a normal, slightly heightened emotion, but they can't self-regulate themselves yet.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to upset you and say that those are two completely different responses, and probably because of different things, and are going to result in different states. But let's go the angry, right? Because that happens a
Mm.
lot. The child was on the iPad at home, and then all of a sudden the parent grabbed the iPad off them and said, "You've got to go to school now." And then they had an argument. So they've come to school really, really angry because they've just been, chastised by their parent because they were supposed to go to, school when they were told to, and they didn't get off the iPad, which I'm sure happens in a lot of households. And they've come in angry. Now, when you're angry, you're in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? It's most people talk fight or flight, but there's also freeze as well, because some people will freeze rather than fight or flight. But when you're in that, then your attention becomes extremely narrow, and all you're focusing on is how to avoid what it is that you're angry at. Yeah. And so it's narrowed to that, and that's all you're going to actually attend to. So you're not going to be attending to the teacher who's trying to get you to sit in the classroom or to get your books out or do all those things, because you're going to be 100% focused on what happened when you were back at home, and how annoyed you are with your parent because they did what they did. And so it narrows your focus, and it narrows what you're actually able to do, and they have to then regulate themselves to get over that. Whereas sad, on the other hand, is more of a depressive response, where they're more depressed, and so they're not going to have dopamine and these things in their brain at the same levels, and so therefore their memory systems aren't going to work. So they're probably going to sit there and actually look as though they're doing the right thing, but they're not actually going to be remembering any of the information or taking any of the information in, because they're going to be in a depressed state rather than in an angry state, which is the angry response. That's sort of why I say it's very different. And it's not fair on a teacher to be expecting them to understand all these different states, right?
Completely agree.
Because that's not their role.
Mm.
But by simply getting a check-in done when you first start the day, when the students first come in. So you imagine a classroom where the teacher walks to the door as the kids walk in. He or she shakes every student's hand as they walk in and eyeball them. They go and do a check-in and think about how they're actually feeling. And then you get them to stand up and do some sort of physical movement for 2 or 3 minutes, which resets them. And then they sit down, and they'll be all ready to actually work, and they'll be more connected with the teacher. And it's only going to take 5 minutes, I'm guessing, max, maybe 7, 8 minutes. You've got the data to know how they're all feeling before you reset them, and then you reset them through the movement, because movement is really good at resetting emotional states. And then they're ready to actually work, and you've already got oxytocin going in their brains. So the movement will get serotonin as well, which are two really good neurotransmitters, and help a lot with regulation, but also help a lot with learning.
There's this beautiful story I'd love to share with you about exactly a teacher who wanted to measure the impact of exercise. What was that like? So he was working in a low socioeconomic area, this beautiful SES area. These beautiful young people were coming to school, and they were marking off their emotions, how they were feeling. And he noticed on the days that they were doing PE, or on Fridays when they were doing some form of exercise with him, their readiness to learn on the scale was coming up to around about high 80s. And he had this hypothesis that he wanted to see what would happen if I started, when they arrived at school in the morning, if I just did physical exercise with my whole class every morning for 3 weeks. What do you think happened? Here you go, Dr. Mark. What do you think were the results after his 3 weeks testing?
Yeah, you'd have happy kids, and you'd have very productive kids who are actually learning. Absolutely. 100%.
But more than that, so I mean, yes, it went up into the 90s, but the really surprising thing that he found was that his partial attendance, late attendance, dropped. People were turning up on time because they wanted to be there. And, I think very similarly to we're talking about the complication of how do we create a sense of belonging and repair community? And there's some really simple, practical things, that we can do on a daily basis that don't lose teaching and learning time, but really deeply allow not only the students to be seen, but as you said, be able to have the benefits of lots of things happening in their body to improve mood and connection. What can you explain to us, When a young person is beginning to identify an emotion or beginning to name an emotion, neurologically, what's happening for them?
So it's I don't like.
No, no, it's okay. Go for it.
Go for it. Okay.
Please go
To
for it.
me,
Go for gold.
to me, we're having emotions all the time, right?
Mm,
When I walk into my office here, I have an emotional response to the office because this is where I get a lot of writing done, and this is where I'm fortunate enough to have lots of webinars with lots of different wonderful people all around the world, which is amazing. So I'm very positive. Straight away I have a very good emotional response to that. And there's things in here that I look at and I have emotional response. Everything in our lives causes emotional responses. So we're constantly having emotional responses because our brains aren't separated into an emotional part
mm,
and a thing part or a place part or activity part. They're all actually linked with each other through what we call heavy learning. So it's all linked constantly. So you can't separate out emotion from other things. You can't say this is now you're feeling happy and now you're feeling sad
mm,
and so on.
mm,
What you're doing, what anybody's doing is this is a place where I feel happy, right? And so that's why teachers need to create a space where the kids feel happy, where the kids want to go, which this teacher that you
mm,
talked about did, right? He created a space because they all were exercising. So they were having those positive endorphins released every time they went to his class. So they want to go to his class because when they go to his class, they get all those positive endorphins that are released. If it's a classroom where they don't get positive where they don't feel positive, where they feel negative for whatever reason,
mm,
then they're going to feel negative every time they walk in there. And there's not much you can do about that except for turn that around by actually checking in with them, connecting with
mm,
them, and establishing what's going on that means that you don't like coming to this class, or what's going on that means that you don't like coming to school. And there's usually a reason for it. Now, it may not be a reason that the school can solve. It may be something that's
mm.
going on at home, right? And a lot of the time it is something that's going on at home. But at least by acknowledging that, and you can say, well, how about we turn that around and make school a nice, safe, healthy place for you, even though that's not great. And this can be a place where you can come and we can change how you feel here, rather than having you feel bad there and feel bad here. At least there's one place where you feel good. Yeah. But yeah,
And
I
I
think it's
no,
wrong to be talking about emotions as in you need to understand your emotions and then get rid of that emotion, right? You need to appreciate, why am I having that emotion in this position, or why am I having that emotion today, or what happened to me? Which is why the check-in's good, right? Because what you're saying is, how do you feel, and then why is it that do you feel like that,
mm.
rather than just how do you feel. Now you need to be happy because you're at school and you've got to start learning, right? Because you need to go, why is that happening? And there will be cues for it. There always is, right?
And I think that you beautifully explained something, because sometimes I feel like when we are talking about young people's emotions, there's this belief that we have to get rid of them, and I just love the way that you explained it, where I often say to people, they're coming and they're going and they're letting you know so many things, but it's not that we need to run at one emotion. And I think that's one of the big things that one of the big questions we get asked, and I'm going to probably, I love your frankness, so I'm going to say it completely the wrong way and you can shoot me down and reframe it, but I'm going to take a bit of a risk here. What I have noticed is there is a fear around emotions, and educators being, "Oh, what do I do when a young person tells me I'm angry? What do I do if they tell me I'm anxious?" And I love the way that you framed, beginning to have a look at the habits, the trends. Are there, does it continue to come up? And I think that's where there's one thing, and I'm going to ask for forgiveness for raising this because I know there is a lot of research out there, and I'm probably damn myself for saying it. But there's a lot of reasons why it's not appropriate just to have them on the wall and the kids moving their charts along now. And, like we're not, no, 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 we're not going there, Mum. We're going to stay well away from that way. But I think there is a purpose towards, first and foremost, what is that connection? How are you arriving in the morning? How are you turning up? I genuinely want to know. I go back to where you first started around, Wouldn't it be amazing if every teacher stood there at the door and high-fived or shook hands or made eye contact, and then the young people were able to express how they were and why they were feeling that way, and have agency to be able to assess their own readiness to learn and what they need to do, and then do some exercise. But I wonder, I wonder if there is repair here, um, around our relationships as adults with emotions. I think our young people have the opportunity that we didn't have. I remember being at school, Mark, and being told that once you hit 40, your white cell, the white matter in your brain's going to die off, and you're going to get, I just remember this dreadful fear of, oh my gosh, 40 must be really old and things are going to go down. I better not say that, I'm blushing. But we didn't have what we have now. We didn't have the knowledge, we didn't have the science. And I don't think, and I'm very broad generalization here, but I don't think that people generally understand the role of emotion and the ability to be able to learn or be present and memory. And I think there's opportunity for repair.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's really, even within schools, because as you know, I work in a lot of
Mm.
schools, and often there'll be this discussion between the deputy principal of health and wellbeing and the deputy principal of learning, about who's going to actually pay for me to come along, because I do both, right? And it's like, well, of course I do both, because both are so intricately woven that they're both really the same thing, and they're part of the same thing. And so this idea that there's health and well-being separate to learning, it doesn't make any logical sense to me, because kids who are learning don't come to school and are happy to come to school and are happy to sit in class and are happy to do all those things. Kids who are doing well at school often, very, very rarely, have mental health problems, or they'll have occasional ones, unless they have a clinical disorder, but they'll have occasional ones, but it's very rare. Whereas it's the kids who aren't doing well at school who have
Mm.
the tantrums and the outbursts and all these things, right? They're the same thing, and we shouldn't think of them as two different things, because if you're connected with the teacher, you will feel happier about getting feedback, negative feedback or positive feedback, right? You'll be feeling as though you want to actually learn from them, because there's someone you like, and we like to learn from people that we actually like, right? And if you don't like the teacher, then you don't learn from them, because our brains have been designed to work out who's part of our in-group and who's not part of our in-group. And we learn really easily from someone who's part of our in-group, and we don't learn from someone who's not part of our in-group. And we actually perceive what they say completely differently. So many years ago, I did a study looking at facial expression perception, and we were just looking at when somebody likes somebody versus when somebody doesn't like somebody, when they're part of the in-group or they're not part of the in-group. And we looked at what happened in their brains when they were actually smiling or looking angry at them. And we showed that when it's someone you like, then you see a smile as a smile, and your brain responds as though, and you get all the proper neurotransmitters released and so on. When someone you don't like smiles at you, you see it as an angry face. And so you actually
Mm.
perceive it as an angry face, even though they're smiling at you. And you get all of the same responses as though they're angry at you, which means that even if a teacher is trying to do the right thing by a student, if they're not connected with the student, if they're not part of their in-group, then every time they smile at them, that student is perceiving that as an angry face, right? As though they're smirking at them, as though they're not trustworthy, and they can't learn from them. So, and I've forgotten why I went down that track, but we need to learn, we need to be connected with the teacher, and we need to enjoy where we're at, because when we're connected, we release dopamine and serotonin in our brains, and that activates memory centers, because we want to remember what happened when we did something good. Yeah, so we've got to do good to actually remember it, because we want to remember when we do something good. And so that's why the two things really do go in hand, and we can't really separate them.
And I just want to sort of come back to that statement, if a teacher is in the not in the good not in the good books with one of the students, what is a way of repair from that stage? Because I think that was a really good story. And yes, what is something that can be done for repair?
Yeah, I often get asked this.
Mm,
And it really depends on the age of the kid.
mm,
Younger kids, it's much easier to repair than teenagers. Teenagers, once you've dissed, it's much harder to bring it back. But with the younger kids, you really just need to do something fun with them, right? You've just
mm,
got to connect with. First, touch them, yeah, and touch them appropriately,
mm,
because that'll release oxytocin. But then do something fun with them. Also, it's not only the teacher; the student needs to feel part of the in group of the class as well, and so getting them to teach something that they're really good at, right?
mm,
Everybody's good at something, right? And so, actually, if you've got a couple of kids in this classroom who obviously aren't part of the in group, if you then get to know them, find out what they're good at, what they like doing, and then get them to teach the rest of the class how to do that. Yeah, they'll actually then become part of the class. It works amazingly well because we all like to show that we're experts at something, and we
mm.
all are experts at something. And you might have a kid who loves Pokemon. You could get the kid to actually teach the other kids about Pokemon, or they could be good at, I don't know, whatever. Just find something that they can do it with. With teenagers, they're a lot more, well, they should be a lot more verbal. Some of them these days are. They should be a lot more verbal. And you need to ask them what's going on, right? You need to just be really honest with them and say, hey, one on one, you've got to do it one on one. You can't do it in a classroom setting, but just say, hey, I noticed this isn't working. Why, and what is it? And sometimes it's just mass is, sorry to mass teachers out there, but often a student earlier on has had a really bad experience with maths and a maths teacher, and therefore every maths teacher after
Mm,
that they're going to dislike, right? And that's not your fault as the maths teacher. But by finding out that was the problem and that they're struggling in maths because they had a problem back here, then you can go, well, hang on, let's work on that. Let's make that better. Let's make it easier. Maths actually isn't that hard. Maths is all about patterns and finding the patterns and so on. And so let's do that. And that will bring them on, hopefully bring them on. It's not going to work 100%, but nothing in human sciences does work 100%. But yeah, trying to work out where it's come from. Why is it that they've dissed you for whatever reason when they're teenagers? And often it can be just that there's a group that doesn't like the teachers, right?
mm,
And if that's the case, then you got to somehow get that group to like the teachers. And again, by getting them to teach something, yeah, and to teach you something, showing your vulnerability by getting them to teach you something and saying, I don't know how to do that. Can you teach me how to do that? Can work absolute dream. I remember I was in Broken Hill. I've gone to Broken Hill multiple times to work with some schools up there. And there was two teenagers who I was told were, trouble, and they'd been in, that had trouble with police and all those sorts of things. And so I said, what do they do? And one of the teachers said, oh, I know they love parkour. So I asked them if they'd teach me parkour, right? I
mm.
nearly broke my neck and I wasn't very good at it. And they had a great laugh at me, right? And they were amazing at parkour. And I was super impressed by what they'd done. And these kids were obviously really intelligent and really dedicated to this parkour thing that they were doing. And they had their own YouTube channel and all this sort of
Mm.
stuff that had a huge number of, and I'm like, use this to get a connection with them so that then they'll actually be part of the group and make it part of some of their projects, right? Because they're in high school now, right? And you can have projects around whatever you want to have projects around. So yeah, we've got to connect on, not to connect on their level, but at least give them the opportunity to be in the lead, be in the position of teaching.
I'm sitting here smiling because I keep thinking of all these incredible, beautiful young people that I've had the privilege of working with for many, many years. And it's often the very colorful ones that leave imprints on my soul. And they're the ones that have, taken me right to the edge, or I've had to really dig deep and find different strategies. And as you were sharing your stories of working with those teenagers in particular, it made me reflect on, we often forget to find out more about the young person. We're often trying to do something rather than observing their cues, their signs, what motivates them, what they're interested in, or even just asking them what they need. what do you need right now? And I remember working with a large group of disengaged young youth, and we were just having a bumpy start to the day. And I just sat down and I was like, let's just go around and talk about what we need right now. And I just remember one of them just going, Miss, what does that mean? Like, it's not a question that they get asked. And, even the simplicity of bringing in their voice. And I know that I've shared this with you, but I think particularly when we are looking to connect, we need to give them agency. We need to begin to observe them. And I love what you just said too. It's not about us at their level, but getting interested in them, getting interested. And I think it's very hard when you're teaching full time and you've got so many people and so many young, inspiring, gorgeous young people running around. It's slowing down enough to recognize the privilege of being there sometimes. And as you start, I keep going back to your physics teacher. I too, full transparency, I had that one teacher too. Miss Kellett was her name. And that role of the teacher, and that level of connection. I'm sort of still caught on a question that I wanted to ask, so I'm going to slightly derail this and go back to have one of my questions asked. I'm so sorry, everyone that's attending this evening. I'm going to bring it back into the role of emotion, and just around some of the strategies that I know that we see and we hear and a lot. And I'm going to go back to that previous statement around the repair around understanding emotions. They come and they go. And, often I hear, what are the things that we can do? What can we do? And validating a student's emotion, allowing space for them. I'm just wondering if you can explain a little bit what happens when we're not trying to fix them, when we're not trying to change them, when we're deeply present and we're acknowledging and validating an emotional state of a young person. What's actually happening for that young person when we are doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Did I do that again? I'm so sorry.
No, that's a great question. The, usually when you're in a state, especially if you're in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, right? Which is what I think often happens in schools. You've got depressed kids, but depressed kids don't often, I mean, they would be getting noticed in the check-in, but they wouldn't, they're not loud and obnoxious, and right? It's the angry kids that are the ones that have to be dealt with quickly if you're a teacher, because someone might get hurt, right? Or they might hurt themselves. And what you're doing there is you're enabling them to understand that they're now safe, right? Because the fight or flight or freeze response is a response to there may be danger here, and I need to respond to that, and that's why we get angry, because we're trying to alleviate a potential danger. And by you giving them the space to connect with you, and you acknowledging that, yes, they're angry, but it's okay, and we're now in a safe space because I'm here and you're now in class, you're no longer in that dangerous space that you were in before. It means that they can down regulate all those, the heart rate can slow down, the blood will stop rushing to the muscles and go back to the stomach, and so they won't get that squidgy thing in the stomach, and the pupils will stop dilating, and all those things will happen once they come to the realization that there's someone there who can protect them and they're safe, right? And so that's what you need to do, so you can get rid of all those things, because while they're in that state, there's no learning, and they are liable to go off the deep end because their attention is narrowed to, I'm just need to protect myself, and if someone comes up and thumps them or anything, they're liable to respond either by freezing or by attacking or by running, right? And this is when we have issues in classrooms, and what we need to be careful of. But if you come in as I'm the person who is enabling you to understand that you're now okay, that it's now safe, then you get rid of all of that, and all of a sudden the person will feel calmer. They'll actually drop to they'll go into an almost depressive state because of the fact they've had too much adrenaline and so on before that. So they'll actually get very calm and very quiet for a period of time. But again, you've got to allow that to happen as well. And that also can be a problem because, and I hate to, because teachers are so busy, and as you were saying before, they've got this curriculum they've got to get through, and then we're turning around saying, "Oh, but you've got to give kids time, and you've got to do all this stuff," and like, but we've got this ridiculous amount of curriculum to get through, which means we've got to chuck out the curriculum and start again, to be honest. But which would make a huge difference to wellbeing, I think, because we wouldn't have this huge curriculum teachers got to get through, and the teachers could actually just spend time with the kids doing what they actually need to learn, which is how to communicate and self-regulate and all those things. But that's a whole different world, right?
Can we do that tomorrow night? No, sorry.
Yeah, definitely. But it would be, it's tough because when there is a child who's angry and then the teacher sits with them and then they do down-regulate that anger thing, then the child's going to go into a dip where they're actually going to get, but then that's usually when the teacher then is, dare I say it, is then giving them the punishment, right? Giving them the, you did that, and so now this is the consequences of it. You now got to stay in the lunchtime. But they're all of a sudden hit a depressive state, and then the teacher all of a sudden goes, now you've got to stay in the lunchtime, and then bang, they're like way down in the depressive state because all of a sudden, yeah. So we've got to be careful of that as well. It's not that there shouldn't be consequences, but don't give them the consequences straight away. Talk to them later after they come back out of that depressive state, and then talk to them about whatever it is the consequences are going to be for that behavior.
And I think timing is really important, and reading and watching for those signs. And when I'm working, particularly with the primary age young people, part of that repair is, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to throw the bin, or it's okay, how do we begin to differentiate behavior from experiencing an emotion safely? And you're right, like if a young person has gone and done something and then there's the consequences and then we're unpacking it, there's just, I think we're going to have to stay in the preventative space just for this webinar because, there is so much happening for them. But in regards to the role of the teacher or the role of the school and community and connection, being able to be that safe person. And anger might be something different at home, or it might be something different in my community, and I might not have experienced, and it's okay for me to safely feel anger and it will pass. And validation is one tool. I'm going to throw another, I'm not going to say it's the last question, the last curveball. I think I've got a few up my sleeve here. But if I kind of look at sort of attachment theory and I look at, particularly in those younger years around co-regulation, could you share a little bit around what's happening in the development and laying the foundations for that young person around identifying, communicating, and learning to manage their emotions through co-regulation? Probably what is co-regulation, I think probably would be a really great place to start. Sorry. I'm blushing again. Look at his face. He's not going to come back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, look, it's hard to just there's a
I
lot of things
know. I know.
during
I'm
that
being mean.
from kindergarten preschool, right, all the way through to teenage years. I mean, teenage years, a huge amount of emotion regulation, understanding emotions goes on, especially when you've got the hormonal changes that are occurring. So, it's not just, I think we forget about how important it is to realize all these changes that are going on in the teen years as well, especially in high schools, that we sort of ignore. We don't ignore, but it's not as seen as important as it is in those primary years, but it actually is just as important. But yeah, during those early years, I mean, it's really hard for a teacher because most of the emotional stuff that's going to come up in the primary school has actually, because of stuff that's gone on from 0 to 7 or 8, right? And that stuff's happened with the parent, and there could have been things during after the pregnancy that could have caused I'm not
Mm.
going. There's a huge number of things that can happen with regulating the emotions because of the relationship with the parents. But also, if the parents have also got mental health issues or there's mental health problems within, then there's going to be problems as well that you need to know. So, yeah, I mean, it's such a complex thing all the way through. But it doesn't have to be complex from the point of view of the teacher, because I think the teacher just needs to know that by simply being their friend and
Mhm.
by being there for them, they can actually help. And just understanding that by you can't all suddenly become connected with them when they're in a state, right? Once they're in a state, then you've got to find someone who is connected with them. So if you're on the playground, for example, and you have somebody who is completely losing it, but you don't know that child, you're not going to be able to intervene easily with that situation. You've got to quickly find a teacher who actually knows that child and actually has a connection with that child. And so it's really difficult to intervene on those when things are happening unless you've already made the connection. So which is why when I work with schools, I always talk about that first week is so important.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be any learning in the first week. The first week should be about connect, especially in primary school, should be about connecting with the teacher and the teacher connecting with the students over a whole week, right? It should be the whole all day, every day for a week, out of the classroom, doing stuff together, learning who each other is, you showing them who you are, and them showing them who they are, and you get in a good, because teachers, we need to treat teachers as professionals,
Mhm.
and as professionals, they have the ability to understand people, because that's what teaching is about, right? Teaching is a people skill, right? It's not,
Mhm.
it's not about the academics. It's actually about the people. And so, the teachers actually spending that week learning who the kids are, so that then when they actually do get into the classroom and start trying to learn, they already know where and how they're going to situate things and how they're going to respond to things, and the kids already feel as though they're part of that teacher's in group. Did I answer that?
Oh no, you answered that. You know what? I feel like I've had you pressed for all these questions. Um, and there's been so much happening on the chat, and I just lifted my head up and it's nearly the end of the webinar. And I have no idea where that time went, Mark. I feel like I mean, I suppose as we begin to walk towards wrapping up, what is one very, like, we can't change, we can't change the whole big education system all at once, but what is one really small simple thing that if you had a magic wand that you wish that every teacher did, maybe once a day, or it might be however often you want, what would that be?
To shake hand or high five or fist pump or whatever you
Mm.
like doing, or whatever the kids like doing, every student looking them in the eyes and just saying, hi, it's great to have you in the class, I hope we're going to have a good day, how are you feeling? Like,
Mm.
that's it. Like, that's all they really need, is you to look them in the eye and get them to look you in the eye. I was at a school last week, and the principal was saying that one of the teachers was clapping during my whole presentation, which was lovely. But he said, yeah, she always stands at the front of the classroom when they come in, and she makes sure that they look her in the eye. And she's always, no, look me in the eye, look me in the eye. You got to look me in the eye. I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's what is it? The window to the soul, right? We've got to
Mm.
be, and we got to be looking at each other in the eye. And I used to get so sad when I used to teach 1,000 first year students in first year neuroscience, and I'd get so many of them would walk up to me and ask me a question, but they'd be looking at their feet when they were asking me the question because they just didn't know how to look me in the eye. Yeah, it was very sad. Yeah, I think teaching kids how to do that, I think it would be so important.
I completely agree. And you made me think of this beautiful young student that was in one of the schools that we were working with. And one of the assistant principals shared with me that it was a school for specific purposes. And he was an little autistic, beautiful young guy. And he kept checking in every morning. He'd arrive at school and he'd say he's angry. Like he'd put in his check-in, he was angry. And I won't name her name, but after a few days, this assistant principal went over and said, I'm just going to make up his name. It's always Timmy. Whenever I'm chatting, it's always Timmy. Timmy, I've just noticed that, you keep saying you're angry every morning. And he goes, I just wanted to know that you looked. And I think that about sums it up.
I
You
love
know,
it.
me too. I'm like, Timmy is my teacher for
Yeah.
everything that we've been talking around. I think one of the things that, there's no point having check-ins if we're not actually looking at patterns and metrics. We don't have to run to everything, but what can we see? Like Timmy, he just wanted to know that he was seen.
So, it's great.
I know. So
Absolutely.
how good is that story?
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to ask you, Ishita, if you can pop a survey in the chat. I have to apologize profusely. There are so many. There's this amazing side chat happening that was going on, and I was reading some of them. And maybe, Mark, if you just want to see if there's any questions that oh, I just saw the fruit and thought, oh, I'm hungry. If there's any questions in there. Ishita's just popped into the chat a survey. With National Check-in Week, we've got a lot of amazing webinars coming up. And also, we're here for you in your schools, in your environment, to be able to bring topics and incredible, incredible people like Dr. Mark, to be able to not only provide information, but also work at that part of all of us learning and understanding, what is important and how do we build those important vital skills for our young people to thrive in life. So please do let us know if there's areas or suggestions. There's some there's there's so many questions. I'm so sorry. We could be here for about 5 months, Mark, I think, after I've thrown Mark under the bus and asked him to basically answer so many questions. I'm just going to pause there for 1 second. As Lucia goes saying, please ask more questions. Oh, bless you, Lucia. Oh, can I grab one of those questions, Mark, from the Q&A?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's and I'll probably just kick this off, and feel free in the chat to respond to this. How can we check in with kids in a way that encourages them to answer with something different than good? One of I suppose, from the work that we do at Life Skills Go, really building out language and vocabulary, and more than just understanding the words, starting with what we call a foundation with emotional literacy. Again, really depends on your age group. But the same way that we here in Australia, if I often say to someone, how are you? They'll go, great, tired, or stressed. Being able to build out that language, but also begin to help them to understand what that is. How does it feel like in your body? What are the thoughts that are going on? And I'll just share a little story of another little guy. I'll call him Timmy too. I remember he said to me, oh, I just feel so good. I feel really happy. And I said, oh, what does that feel like in your body? He said, feels like a freshly cut orange. And my experience has been young people can access somatically and that imagery of what's happening quite well as they begin to build out an understanding. I feel we as adults limit that. But when we begin to ask more questions, and what we will do is we will follow this session up with some of those emotion cards and how we can begin to build that language and really work with young people of that age will really begin to help us move from good to bad. Also modeling, really bringing your language in and I'll often, if I'm working in a classroom, I'll share something that happened in my morning, or something that, I might be happy, I might be frustrated, and, just sharing it just as an experience. But I might also link it to my body too. So if I'm sharing about it, I might place my hand on the part of my body that I felt that emotion. Over to you, Mark. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think also kids will often just say, "Yeah, I'm happy." You could, if you've got the time, ask them, have you felt frustrated? What happened last time you felt frustrated, or what happened last time you felt angry, or because that will actually give them an opportunity to think about, when these things have actually happened, and so therefore you can learn more. They can learn more about themselves and what's actually going on. But yeah, it is a problem. I mean, I have teenage kids, and I'm lucky if I get a grunt when my son comes home, and you've got to probe sometimes
Mm.
if we're talking about teens, especially.
And I'm selfishly asking, I promise you this will be the last one, but having children really young, and having my teenagers go through their teenage years, one of my prided, like my most favorite strategies, was pretending to drive somewhere and putting them in the car and drive. I did a lot of driving through the teenage years. Why is that?
It feels less confronting because if you sit down with someone and you're opposite, you're looking directly at them, and that can be really confronting, especially for teenagers, which is why the driving works so well. Whereas if you're driving, you're looking forward and they're looking forward, and so therefore they don't actually have to look you directly in the face. So it is a great strategy. You can just simply, have the teenager sit beside you on a couch, or sit beside you, both looking towards something else, looking at a wall, looking at a painting.
Mm,
Will work. Any of those things will work where you're not actually looking directly at them. It's important to look someone in the eye when you first say hello to them, but it can be very confronting for someone to be basically stared at, right? It feels almost
mm,
you're staring at them if you're looking face to face with someone. And so, yeah, sticking them in the car is a great way to do it. And yeah, I do that with especially my teenage daughter. I get a lot from her if I'm
hmm
in the car with her driving, especially if she gets to choose the music she plays,
hmm
which drives me nuts a bit sometimes. Whereas with my son, it's usually playing basketball, one-on-one basketball, or going for a swim or a surf, and then I'll
Mm,
get him to talk. But you got to find what works if
mm,
you're a parent and you're looking for options there. But that's why you don't want to be face to face with them, because that's very confronting.
mm. No, it's beautiful, and I'm really aware of your time as well. Thank you so much, Mark, for being here. And we have Mark again attending another webinar, which he might ask for a different moderator after having me this
Oh,
evening. Oh, I know. No, I
hang
just want to say thank you so much. And I think, I felt really, as I said to you at the beginning, your manner of being able to break things down, keep them really simple, return us to really practical things that we can do today, I think is really important for the pace that we're all living at, everything that's happening, and going right back to, connections, community, and then learning will come. That I really, really appreciate that.
so important. So important. Thank you so much, Nikki, for having me along.
No,
Really appreciate it.
thank you.
I love what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Can't wait to see you again soon. You take care.